Can David take on Goliath? What am I talking about? I'm talking about late payments by large organisations to SMEs. There's currently a bill going through the Parliament at the moment called the Commercial Payments Bill, which is going to be, in effect, update or successor to the pre-existing late payment to commercial debts legislation. And it's supposed to be, it's got some very enthusiastic backers out there that are championing this particular bill, thinking that it's going to make a big cultural shift. I have no doubts about that, as we shall see and I shall explain. But the point ultimately is what the bill says. If we ignore construction contracts and the retention side of things, which I'm not going to go into, it talks about contracts, typically business to business contracts, where the payment terms are essentially, it's a maximum of 60 days for private companies, public's 30 days, but ignore the public sector contracts for the purposes of this discussion. And in addition, once those payment terms are breached, there will be statutory interest applicable, and that will be mandatory, and that's 8% over base rate. Now, the whole emphasis of this is to speed up payments that are made to SMEs by larger organisations to stop so many of them going to the wall. The question is whether this bill can actually realistically achieve that and achieve this cultural shift that perhaps it is hoped that it will. It's difficult to see how that necessarily is going to be the case, but ultimately what the bill is going to do as well is going to empower the Small Business Commissioner to, assuming that the bill becomes law, going to empower them to and require them to set up an adjudication scheme where disputes can be referred to and they can make an award. But like all adjudication schemes, typically there will be some element of appeals process, and indeed in this particular piece of legislation there are 3 potential points of an appeal involving jurisdiction, involving natural justice, involving things like fraud and so on, which are available to the recipient, the adverse recipient of an award. They can then appeal, and the point there is that what is hoped from this kind of legislation is to speed up payments. Once you have a system that allows an appeal to be lodged, that essentially kicks things back into the normal pedestrian-paced court system, whether it be the county court, the high court, or whatever, then the effectiveness of the legislation is going to be in some doubt. Not all referrals to the scheme will necessarily be taken on. There is another issue which is raised in the bill as it's currently drafted. But I think there's a much more fundamental question as to the impact that this bill can have to really empower Goliath not to empower Goliath, to empower David to take on Goliath. And that is that there's a natural bargaining relationship between 2 parties, between big business or the larger organisation and the SME. And so long as the larger organisation is responsible for a substantial proportion of the smaller SME's turnover, then the question has to be asked is how effective is the bill going to be able to be in empowering the SME, i.e. David, to take on Goliath, because the SME is going to be very mindful, conceivably, before it's going to want to disrupt its turnover that it requires to put food on the director's table of the SME by essentially slapping legal rights around the neck of the larger organisation to get payment that much more quickly than perhaps the larger organisation wants or thinks that it's required to give to the SME. And so because of that, it's therefore got to be in some doubt as to whether or not this legislation of this kind can really be any more impressive in terms of its success than what we already have in the late payment to commercial debts legislation, undoubtedly there will be people saying, oh, it's going to make a much, much, much bigger impact because of the mandatory provisions, but I have my doubt as to whether it's really going to be such a game changer. In any event, we shall see. Questions, queries, concerns, give us a shout. We know insolvency inside out.